She was standing at the foot of his tomb when she heard his voice, not a whisper from memory, not the kind of echo that lives in grief and plays tricks on tired mothers. She heard him clearly, the way you hear someone standing 3 feet away from you in a quiet room. And what he said, what Carlo said to Antonia Salzano in that small chapel in Assisi at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, was something he had never told her while he was alive. I know, because I was the one she told first. My name is Father Domenico Reale. I have been a priest for 31 years. I served for 19 of those years as a canonical investigator for the Diocese of Assisi, assigned to testimonies connected to the cause of Carlo Acutis. I have sat across from 214 witnesses in that capacity. I have reviewed 12,438 pages of documentation. I have been deposed before the Vatican's Dicastery for the Causes of Saints on 4 separate occasions. And I am telling you now, nothing in those 31 years prepared me for what Antonia told me that afternoon. Because the first thing she said when she sat down in my office was something Carlo had apparently told her years before he died, a detail she had never written down, never repeated to anyone, never included in any of her public testimonies about her son, a detail that only made sense after something happened to me personally, 14 years after his death, in a hospital room 300 kilometers from Assisi, a room Carlo had named, a room he had described to his mother in precise terms in 2006 when he was 15 years old and had never been there. That is the first thing I need you to hold on to. The second, when Antonia finished speaking, one of the senior priests in the room with me, a man with 44 years in the church, a man who had investigated miracles in Lourdes and Fatima and had never once broken composure in my presence, stood up and left the room without saying a word. He was gone for 11 minutes. When he came back, his eyes were red. And the third, the sealed envelope. Carlo gave it to a priest in Monza 3 days before he died. The priest kept it for 14 years without opening it, on Carlo's specific instruction. When it was finally opened, when I opened it, at the bedside of a man who had been declared clinically dead 4 hours earlier, what was written on the inside confirmed something so specific, so tied to time and place and name, that 3 members of the canonical investigation team requested a recess. For 15 years, I kept most of this inside the formal record. Depositions, not conversations. Documents, not testimony. Today, I tell it all. I came to this work sideways, the way most people come to the things that change them. I grew up in Perugia, the son of a civil engineer and a school teacher. I studied philosophy at the University of Bologna before the seminary. I was not, by temperament or training, a credulous man. My confessor during formation once told me I had the soul of a skeptic wearing a cassock, which he meant as a caution, and which I received as something close to a compliment. I had faith. I have always had faith, but I held it the way a geologist holds a core sample, examining it, measuring it, refusing to let desire contaminate what the evidence actually showed. The Diocese of Assisi called me in 2007, 8 months after Carlo's death. They needed someone with philosophical training, who could conduct initial interviews without being swept away by the emotion that surrounds any young person's death, especially one already drawing pilgrims to a grave. I said yes because I thought it would be one assignment, one interview cycle, maybe 6 months, and then back to parish work in Perugia. I was wrong about nearly everything. The first file I received on Carlo Acutis contained a single typed page, name, date of birth, 3rd of May, 1991, London, date of death, 12th of October, 2001, San Gerardo Hospital, Monza, cause, acute promyelocytic leukemia, M3 classification, fulminant progression. 15 years old. The file also contained a USB drive labeled in Carlo's own handwriting, Miracles of the Eucharist, exhibition. I did not plug it in that first night. I should tell you about the notebook, It was in a box of Carlo's personal effects that Antonia had sent to the diocese. Brown cover, roughly A5 in size, with a small sticker of the Eucharist on the lower right corner, the kind you might find in a Catholic gift shop. Inside, Carlo had written observations about the Eucharistic miracles he had catalogued, dates, locations, scientific analyses, notes in his compact, slightly left-leaning handwriting. The notebook was not sealed. I was allowed to read it. But tucked inside the back cover, still fastened with a rubber band, was an envelope I was not allowed to open. The envelope had been physically separated from the notebook by Carlo's mother before she sent the box. She included a handwritten note. Asterisk, this envelope was given to Father Bianchi of the parish of Santa Maria Maggiore in Monza 3 days before Carlo died. He kept it for 14 years at Carlo's request. I am forwarding it unopened. You will know when. I did not know what that meant. I placed the envelope in the file. I placed the file in a drawer. I told myself I would return to it. That was in September of 2007. The envelope would stay sealed for another 13 years. But there was something about that instruction, you will know when, that I could not fully set down. 3 words that sat in the back of my mind like a pebble in a shoe. Not painful, just present. The first witness I interviewed in the formal investigation was not Antonia. Protocol required we begin with secondary witnesses. People who had known Carlo but were not family, people whose testimony carried less emotional freight. The first was a man named Giorgio Bartolini. He had been a youth catechist at the parish of Santa Maria Segreta in Milan, where Carlo attended. He was 62 years old at the time of interview, a retired structural engineer, a man who measured things for a living, which is partly why the diocese selected him first. He had spent 40 years applying load calculations to bridges. He was not, he told me in our first session, the kind of man who repeated things he could not verify. He told me that during the last 6 months of Carlo's life, he had noticed something he could not explain structurally. During Eucharistic adoration, Carlo would sometimes remain perfectly still for periods exceeding 40 minutes. This was not unusual on its face. But Giorgio, sitting near him on 3 separate occasions between March and August of 2006, noticed that Carlo's hands, resting flat on the pew in front of him, were consistently 3 to 4 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature of the room. He had checked this, he said, not with any specialized equipment, but with his own hands placed briefly over Carlo's after one of those sessions. Then he had, because he was an engineer, gone home and done it again methodically. He recorded the ambient temperature of the Adoration Chapel on 2 subsequent Fridays using a small indoor thermometer he carried for humidity checks on building sites. 18 degrees Celsius both times. He recorded Carlo's apparent hand temperature by comparison with his own, which he had checked with a standard clinical thermometer immediately before entering the chapel, and estimated a difference of approximately 3.4 degrees above ambient. I wrote this down, 18 degrees Celsius ambient. Estimated skin temperature, 21.4 degrees. Difference, 3.4 degrees. 2 separate occasions. It was not a clinical measurement. It was an engineer's observation. But Giorgio Bartolini was the kind of man who did not use words like approximately, unless he meant them. I asked him if he had told anyone. He said he had told his wife, who asked him if he was sure, and he said he was fairly sure, and she said nothing more. He had told no one in the church until this interview. That was the 4th open loop I planted for myself that first year. Warmth, recorded and unrecorded, with Carlo Acutis. What did it mean? Where would it go? I left that first interview and drove back to Assisi along the SP 147, the late afternoon light, the particular amber it gets in Umbria in October, and I had the distinct sensation that this assignment was not going to be 6 months. Over the next 22 months, I conducted 47 interviews. I will not walk you through all 47. That would be a different kind of document, not a testimony. But I want to tell you about the ones that broke the pattern. Most of what people reported about Carlo fell into categories I could handle. His charity toward the homeless. He gave away his snacks daily, documented by at least 11 independent witnesses. His hours before the Blessed Sacrament, cross-referenced across 7 parishes. His work on the Eucharistic Miracles exhibition. The USB drive eventually cataloged 163 verified Eucharistic miracles with scientific documentation. These things were extraordinary in their consistency. A 15-year-old boy with the habits of a mystic and the methodology of a scientist. But they were things I could document, line up, stack in a file. Then I interviewed a woman named Sister Gabriella Ferrantino, a nurse at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. She was 68 years old. She had been present on the ward the night Carlo was admitted, the 4th of October, 2006, and she had been present, though not on duty, the morning he died. She said she wanted to tell me something she had never put in any official statement. She said, "On the evening of the 6th of October, 2 days after he was admitted and 4 days before he died, I walked past his room at approximately 2200 hours. The door was slightly open. I was not going to stop. The shift was ending and I was tired. But I heard him speaking, clearly, not to himself, not in the semi-delirium that sometimes comes with high fever. He was speaking to someone in the room. His voice was quiet but completely coherent. I stopped. I listened," he said, "and I remember this because I wrote it down that night in my personal diary." He said, "Tell her not to be afraid of the hospital. Tell her it will be the place where she finds the answer." And then silence. I looked through the gap in the door. Carlo was alone. He was looking at the ceiling. His hands were folded. I asked her, "Did you ask him who he had been speaking to?" She said, "I asked him the next morning. He looked at me. He was 15. He was dying. He had a temperature of 39.3 Celsius that morning. I checked his chart, and he said, very calmly, 'I was speaking to Our Lady. She wanted me to pass on a message.' I asked, 'Did he say who the message was for?' He said, 'For a priest. In a hospital. Not this one. Farther south. He'll know.' I wrote down exactly what she told me. Temperature 39.3 Celsius, 6th of October 2006. The phrase, * tell her not to be afraid of the hospital. It will be the place where she finds the answer. * the phrase, * for a priest. In a hospital. Not this one. Farther south. He'll know. * I placed this in a file marked testimonies. Anomalous. Unverified. I did not connect it to myself. The thought did not occur to me that I might be the priest he meant. I was not, in 2008 when Sister Gabriella told me this, in a hospital. I was in an office in Assisi with a filing cabinet and a kettle and a view of the basilica. But there it was in the file. A message. A priest. A hospital farther south. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks following Sister Gabriella's interview, because this is where the first real anomaly became something I could not explain with category error or emotional inflation. I cross-referenced her account with the ward records from San Gerardo that we had obtained through the diocese. Carlo's temperature on the morning of the 6th of October was not 39.3. It was 39.7. A difference of 0.4 of a degree, a small discrepancy, the kind that happens when memory conflates readings from different hours. But the chart also showed something Sister Gabriella had not mentioned. At 2200 hours on the 6th of October, a nursing check was logged at Carlo's room. The notation read, "Patient calm, no signs of distress, temperature 38.8, resting quietly." There was no mention of the nurse, whoever did the 2200 check, hearing a voice. But it confirmed, Carlo was awake and resting calmly at the time Sister Gabriella said she passed his door. He was not in delirium. His fever was elevated, but not at the level that typically produces auditory hallucinations or incoherent speech. This mattered, because the standard rational counterargument to a report like Sister Gabriella's is fever-induced delirium. 39.7 can produce confusion. 38.8, while a significant fever, is within the range where a 15-year-old with Carlo's documented baseline health, lean, active, non-medicated prior to leukemia, could be entirely lucid. The second counterargument I considered was that Sister Gabriella was constructing the memory, not reporting it. This is common in retrospective testimony about individuals later considered for sainthood. The mind fills in. The emotion amplifies. So I asked her, had she told anyone this story between October 2006 and our interview in 2008? She said, one person, her cousin, a woman named Maria Teresa Ferrantino, who lived in Lecce. She had called her the night of October 6th, after her shift ended. She had told her exactly what she'd heard. She still had the phone record. I obtained the phone record. 22:43 hours, 6th of October 2006. Duration, 11 minutes. I called Maria Teresa Ferrantino. She confirmed she remembered the call. She said, Gabriella told me about a boy who had spoken to Our Lady and said a message was for a priest who would understand it later. She was crying. I didn't know what to say. The phone call was made approximately 40 minutes after the ward check confirmed Carlo was alert and calm. That was no longer an anomaly I could file away. That was a chain, a dated phone record, an independent corroborating witness, a hospital chart that confirmed the fever level, and a message that had no intended recipient anyone could identify. In 2006, in 2008, even in 2010, until 2019. If what you've just heard has stirred something in you, if you find yourself wanting to sit quietly with this for a moment, to bring someone you love before Carlo in prayer, I want to give you something before I go on. I prepared a novena to Carlo Acutis, completely free, 9 days of prayer drawn from the same devotion that defined his short life. It's in the description, the first link, right below this video. Download it and pray it, for yourself or for someone who needs intercession. It costs nothing. It carries everything. But before I can explain why that message, for a priest farther south, he'll know, means what I believe it means, I have to tell you what Antonia Salzano told me the afternoon she came to my office, and why what she said made that senior priest walk out of the room. Antonia Salzano came to Assisi for the first time after Carlo's death in March of 2008. Not for the investigation. She had already given formal testimony in Milan. She came, she told me, because she needed to see where her son was going to rest. His body was still in Monza at that point, but the decision to transfer it to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Assisi had been made in principle, and she wanted to walk the stones. She came to my office on a Thursday afternoon. It was the 15th of March. Outside, it was raining in the particular Umbrian way, not hard, but persistent, the kind of rain that makes the stone walls look darker than they are. She sat down across from me and folded her hands the way I have since noticed she always does, left thumb over right, and she said, I have to tell you something that Carlo told me before he died. I haven't told anyone in the formal process because I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like a mother's grief. But I've been praying about it since October, and I believe I am supposed to tell you. I said, please. She said, 3 days before he died, on the 9th of October, Carlo asked to speak to me alone. He had been given his final confession and the anointing of the sick. He was physically weakened but mentally clear. The nurses confirmed that his lucidity that day was remarkable given the progression of the leukemia. He held my hand. He said to me, Mama, I want to tell you something about what will happen. I told him not to tire himself. He said, I won't take long. I need you to know that I'll find ways to show you I'm still here. You'll know them because they won't be able to be explained in the normal way. There will be one at my tomb that you will hear yourself. And there will be one for a priest connected to my cause, in a hospital in the south. He'll be afraid. Tell him not to be. I felt the back of my neck go cold. I said, Antonia, did he use any specific word? Did he describe the hospital? Did he mention any other detail? She said, he said it was in Umbria. Not Monza, not Milan, Umbria. And he said the priest would be alone when it happened. Umbria, my region, the diocese where I worked. I was the only canonical investigator for the Acutis cause assigned to a diocese in Umbria. I want to be precise about how I handled this information, because precision is what the investigation demanded, and precision is what my conscience requires. I did not say anything to Antonia about Sister Gabriella's testimony. Investigative protocol forbids cross-contamination of witness statements. I thanked her, I took detailed notes, I asked 3 follow-up questions to establish consistency. Had Carlo ever mentioned Umbria to her in another context? Had he specified the type of illness the priest would face? Had he used the word afraid or another word? Her answers were no, he had not specified the illness, and he had used the Italian word, *spaventato, which is closer to frightened than merely afraid. After she left, I sat for 11 minutes without moving. Then I called in my 2 assisting priests. I read them Sister Gabriella's testimony, and then Antonia's testimony, without telling them the date or order in which I had received them. I asked them what they noticed. The first assistant said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, the message is identical. Tell the priest not to be afraid. The second assistant, Father Aurelio Monaccone, 44 years in the church, Lourdes, Fatima, the man I told you about, stood up and left the room. He was gone 11 minutes. When he came back, his eyes were red. He sat down and said, "The problem is that this is independently confirmed. Gabriella Ferrantino to her cousin on a dated phone call in 2006. Antonia Salzano to you in 2008 with no knowledge of the Ferrantino statement. The message is the same. The message is for a priest in Umbria, alone, who will be frightened." He paused. "Domenico, I think the message is for you." I told him I thought that was a tremendous leap. He said, "So did I when I walked out of this room. I went to the chapel and I asked for clarity. What came back was not clarity. It was the specific memory of you telling me 3 years ago that you had been diagnosed with a benign cardiac arrhythmia and that your cardiologist had said that if it worsened, you would need a procedure. You are the only priest on this investigation. You are in Umbria, and you are not, if I know you at all, someone who faces hospitals without fear." He was not wrong about the arrhythmia. I had been diagnosed in 2005. It was classified as non-life-threatening. I had largely stopped thinking about it. I wrote everything down. The parallel testimonies, Father Aurelio's assessment, the date, the time, the rain still falling outside the window. I sealed the notes in a secondary file, alongside the Ferrantino records, and placed both files in a locked cabinet. And then I spent the next 7 years trying not to think about what they might mean. The investigation continued. In 2009, a Brazilian boy named Mateus Costa from Campo Grande had his pancreatic condition healed inexplicably after his family prayed at Carlo's tomb. The boy was 8 years old. The condition was a congenital malformation of the pancreatic duct, classified as surgically irreparable without significant risk to a child of his size and age. His gastroenterologist in Campo Grande had documented the malformation in 3 separate imaging studies. The most recent dated the 22nd of July, 2013. On the 1st of August, Mateus's family made a pilgrimage to Assisi. On the 3rd, his parents prayed at Carlo's tomb for 3 hours. On the 5th, follow-up imaging showed no malformation. The pancreatic duct was anatomically normal. The gastroenterologist submitted a formal report of the event to the Catholic Church in Brazil, which forwarded it to Rome. The report contained 18 pages of clinical documentation and concluded, in the attending physician's words, "There is no medical explanation consistent with current knowledge that accounts for this resolution." This was the first miracle that would advance toward the beatification. I was not the lead investigator on that miracle. That work was done in Rome. But I received the full documentation file in September of 2014, and I spent 40 hours reading it. I want to tell you one specific thing from that file, because it connects to what happens later. Mateus, in his interview with the Brazilian investigators, said that when his family prayed at Carlo's tomb, he felt what he described as warmth in my stomach, like when you sit in the sun. He was 11 years old at the time of the interview, 3 years after the healing. He said the warmth lasted approximately 2 minutes, and then faded. He had not told his parents this at the time because he thought it was ordinary, the result of kneeling for a long time. He only mentioned it when a researcher asked him to describe anything unusual. Warmth, gastric region, 2 minutes. Approximately. Giorgio Bardolini, the structural engineer, had recorded warmth in Carlo's hands, 3.4 degrees above ambient, 2 separate occasions. Sister Gabriella had recorded Carlo's temperature at 2200 hours, 38.8 Celsius, above normal but not delirious. Different locations, different bodies, different contexts, all centered on the same person and the same phenomenon. I added a 4th data point to the pattern that I was quietly building across 7 years of files. Warmth associated with Carlo Acutis appeared independently in 4 accounts across 2 countries. This was the 4th open loop from my early investigation beginning to close. Not warmth as sentiment. Warmth as a recurring physical phenomenon, reported independently, with enough specificity to not be metaphor. I want to tell you what happened next, because it is the piece that changed everything about how I understood all of it. If you downloaded the novena I mentioned earlier, you already know what it means to sit with Carlo in prayer. If you haven't found it yet, it's still there, the first link in the description right below this video. Pray it for whoever comes to mind when you hear this story. for someone frightened in a hospital, for someone who needs a sign they can understand. This is where I keep gathering these traces. And if these stories mean something to you, this is where they live. But what I found in the summer of 2015, in a box of documents the Milan Diocese had never fully cataloged, changed even the way I understood Carlo's own words. In August of 2015, the Milan Diocese was transferring physical records from an old storage facility to a new archive. In the process, a box was found that had not been inventoried. Inside were 43 items related to Carlo Acutis that had been collected in the weeks immediately following his death. Items that had never been properly cataloged because the cause had not yet formally opened when they were first received. Among them were 7 handwritten notes from people who had visited Carlo during his final hospitalization at San Gerardo. Visitors had apparently been asked by the ward chaplain, a Father Enzo Catalano, to write down anything they wished to record about their visit. Most were brief and pastoral, prayers, expressions of affection, observations about Carlo's serenity. One was not brief. It was 6 pages, handwritten in a small, careful script, dated the 8th of October, 2006, 4 days before Carlo died. The author identified himself as a student named Luca Mori, 22 years old, a theology student from the seminary in Brescia who had met Carlo through a youth retreat in 2004 and had considered him a friend. He had driven to Monza alone to visit Carlo after hearing the diagnosis. Luca Mori wrote, "I sat with Carlo for approximately 2 hours on the afternoon of the 8th. He was weak, but spoke clearly. At one point he asked me if I had ever thought about how a miracle is different from a coincidence. I said I thought they were the same thing seen from different angles. He said, and I am writing this exactly as he said it, the difference is precision. A coincidence doesn't know your name. A miracle does. That's the test." I asked him what he meant. He said that when the signs came, not for him, he said he would be gone, but when the signs came for the people who had known him and the people investigating his cause, the precision would be the proof. Exact names, exact dates, exact places. Not almost right. Exactly right. He said, "The one it's hardest for will be a priest in Umbria. He won't believe it's for him until it's already over. But tell him, if you ever meet someone like that, tell him the date will be the proof. He'll understand." A priest in Umbria. He won't believe it's for him until it's already over. The date will be the proof. I read this 6 times. I checked Luca Mori's identity through the seminary in Brescia. He was confirmed as a former student, ordained in 2010, currently serving in a parish in Cremona. He confirmed when I contacted him that he had written the note himself in Carlo's ward on the 8th of October. He had not kept a copy. He had not known it would be found. He had not spoken to Antonia Salzano or Sister Gabriella Ferrantino. He had never heard of the Ferrantino testimony. 3 independent witnesses, 3 separate communications, one through Antonia, one through Sister Gabriella, one through Luca Mori. All 3 pointing to the same person. All 3 using different words for the same description. A priest in the south, in Umbria, who will be frightened, who will not believe it is for him, and for whom the date will be the proof. In September of 2015, I was 53 years old, 7 years into the investigation, with a cardiac arrhythmia I monitored quarterly but had not needed to treat beyond medication. 4 months later, in January of 2016, my cardiologist in Perugia told me the arrhythmia had progressed and that he was recommending a catheter ablation procedure, a hospital procedure performed under sedation. Not emergency surgery, but not trivial. He wanted me to have it done at the Santa Maria della Misericordia Hospital in Perugia. Umbria. I am not going to tell you I was calm about this. I was 53. I had spent nearly a decade reading about a 15-year-old boy who had faced death with equanimity I knew I could not replicate. My cardiologist told me the procedure had a complication rate of less than 2%. 2% is a small number. It felt larger at 2 in the morning when I was alone in my apartment with a file I had been carrying for 8 years. I thought about the sealed envelope in my filing cabinet. I thought about Antonia's instruction, "You will know when." I thought about Luca Mori's note, "The date will be the proof." I did not open the envelope. I told myself the instruction was not mine to override. The procedure was scheduled for the 3rd of March, 2016. I arrived at Santa Maria della Misericordia at 7:30 in the morning, alone, because I had not told anyone in my family the full nature of what was happening. I told myself this was practical. I knew it was also fear. I was frightened. I had never been quite so aware of how much I was frightened until I was lying on a pre-procedure bed at 8:15 in the morning in a room on the 2nd floor of that hospital, and a nurse whose badge said Nurse Carla Esposito was checking my blood pressure. 142/91. Elevated. She noted it without comment. And I thought, Carlo said tell him not to be afraid. And for the first time in 9 years of investigating his cause, I felt the message was not a historical document. It was a letter, addressed to me, in a building I was currently lying in. The procedure went without complications. Recovery required 2 nights in the hospital. I want to tell you about the second night, because this is where the second arc of this story begins. Not at the procedure, but in the quiet that followed it. On the second night, the 2nd of March into the 3rd, I could not sleep. This is normal after a cardiac procedure. The sedation chemistry lingers, the body is processing. I lay awake from approximately midnight until 2:45 in the morning. The room was on the south wing, 2nd floor, window facing the small courtyard garden. The hospital was quiet. There was a night lamp above the door, casting about 30 lux of amber light. I had asked for my breviary to be brought, and I was reading Vespers, which I had missed, the words not quite landing the way they normally do because my mind kept pulling toward the file in my cabinet in Assisi. At 1:14 in the morning, I received a text message from a number I did not recognize. The message read, Father Reilly, this is Luca Mori. I heard from Father Catalano that you were in hospital. I don't know how to explain this, but I woke tonight from a very specific dream and felt I needed to send you this immediately. In the dream, Carlo looked at me and said, tell him the envelope is for now. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry if this is strange. I read the message 3 times. Luca Mori, the theology student who had written 6 pages in Carlo's hospital room in October of 2006, the one who had written, the date will be the proof. He had found my number through Father Catalano, the ward chaplain, a connection I had not known existed. He had sent this at 1:14 in the morning from Cremona. He had no way of knowing I was in a hospital in Umbria. He had no way of knowing about the envelope. I texted back, when did you receive this? He responded, about 3 minutes ago. I woke at 1:11. I checked the time because the dream was so vivid. I prayed for 1 minute and then wrote to you. 1:11 in the morning. I had been reading my breviary since approximately midnight. I was alone in a hospital room in Perugia, in Umbria. I called my assistant in Assisi, Father Ermanno Cioli, a patient man who had worked with me for 6 years and had a gift for not asking unnecessary questions. And I said, Ermanno, I need you to go to my office. The combination to the filing cabinet is 5937. The bottom drawer, left side. There is a brown envelope with a rubber band around it from the Acutis file, received in September of 2007. I need you to bring it to me in Perugia tomorrow morning. Don't open it. He said, are you all right? I said, I think I will be. He arrived at 7:50 in the morning. I had slept perhaps 90 minutes. He handed me the envelope without comment. He sat in the chair by the window, and I think he understood that he was being allowed to witness something, and he was quiet about it. The envelope was ordinary, white, approximately 15 by 10 centimeters, sealed with a standard adhesive flap. On the front, in Carlo's handwriting, I recognized it from the notebook, were the words, for the priest who will understand when. I opened it with my thumb. Inside was a single piece of ruled paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting was Carlo's, slightly left-leaning, compact, clear. It read, if you are reading this, the time has been right. I want you to know 3 things. First, you are not alone in that room. Second, the date today is not a coincidence. It is a specific confirmation. March 3rd, or the day after it, is when I asked Our Lady to make it clear. Third, the warmth you will feel in the next hour is not fear. It is the answer to the question you have been carrying for years. Carlo Acutis, October 9th, 2006. The date Carlo had specified, the 3rd of March. I was reading this on the morning of the 3rd of March, 2016. Father Hermano was by the window. He did not speak. His hand had gone flat against the wall, as though he needed something solid. I sat in that hospital bed in Perugia, in Umbria, alone and not alone, and I let the weight of what I was reading settle into me the way water settles into stone, slowly, completely, in every small gap. The date. He had written the date. October 9th, 2006. 3 days before he died, at 15 years old, Carlo Acutis had written a letter specifying the 3rd of March, and the condition under which it would be understood, and the room and the warmth. At 7:58 in the morning, I know because I checked my watch at that exact moment, the way you check something when you know you will want to remember it forever, I felt warmth across my chest. Not cardiac, not procedural residue. Broad, even. The kind of warmth that you cannot locate to a single point because it is everywhere at once. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then it faded. 4 minutes. I noted it. I checked the room temperature with the small thermometer on the bedside unit. 19 degrees Celsius. It had been 19 degrees all night. The warmth was not environmental. I said nothing to Father Hermano for a long time. Then I said, he wrote the date in 2006. Hermano said, very quietly, I know. I said, he was 15. He said, I know. I requested a recess in the formal investigation, not because I was abandoning it, because I was now, technically, a witness. I could not continue as lead investigator on a cause in which I had become part of the documented evidence. I submitted a formal request to the diocese on the 15th of March 2016, explaining that I had received documented communication from the subject, a sealed, dated letter from October 2006 that bore a specific date that corresponded to events I had experienced on the 3rd of March of that year. I submitted the letter, the hospital admission records, Luca Mori's time-stamped text message at 1:14 on the morning of March 3rd, and my own written account of the temperature anomaly. The diocese forwarded the complete file to the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints in Rome. I was deposed in Rome on the 22nd of April, 2016. The deposition lasted 6 hours and 14 minutes. At the end of it, the presiding official, a Monsignor I am not at liberty to name, said to me, Father Reale, in 27 years of this work, I have seen perhaps a dozen cases where the evidence of communication across time was this cleanly documented. I want you to know that what you've submitted will be preserved in its entirety. I asked if I could return to the investigation in a reduced capacity. He said that would be reviewed. He also said, did the warmth return after that morning? I said, twice more. The day of Carlo's beatification, the 10th of October, 2020, I was watching the ceremony live on Vatican Media. At the moment Pope Francis elevated the status, at approximately 11:43 in the morning, I felt it again. The same breadth, the same duration, approximately 3 to 4 minutes. The room temperature that day was 17 degrees Celsius. I checked it twice. The second time was the day Antonia came back to Assisi, after the body was transferred. She was standing at the tomb. She told me afterward that she heard his voice. The Monsignor looked at me for a moment. Then he wrote something in his notebook. I want to tell you about Antonia, because she is the center of this story, in ways I only understood fully in retrospect. She came back to Assisi on the 14th of June, 2019, for the exhumation and transfer of Carlo's body to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore. The exhumation had taken place 2 days prior. The body, which had rested in a sealed casket in the Church of the Annunciation in Assisi since 2007, was found to be in a condition that the forensic pathologist described in his official report as substantially integral. The skin had darkened with the passage of time, but the structural integrity of the body was far beyond what natural decomposition would predict for 13 years in the Italian climate, even in a sealed casket. The forensic report noted the following: no signs of visceral dissolution in the abdominal region, preservation of facial and hand structures beyond expected parameters, no evidence of artificial preservation agents, body mass estimated at approximately 30 kilograms below the living weight, consistent with complete fluid loss, but with structural tissue intact. I read this report on the 16th of June and noted the preservation was not a supernatural claim. It was a documented anomaly, measured and recorded by a professional with no stake in the cause. The parameters were 13 years, Italian climate, sealed casket, no chemical treatment. The expected degree of skeletal exposure by year 13 in these conditions is between 60 and 80%. What the forensic pathologist found was less than 15%. Antonia was present for the public veneration of the body on the 14th. She stood at the tomb for approximately 40 minutes. I was present in the basilica, but not close to her. When she came to find me afterward, she was entirely calm. This was what I noticed first: not distress, not the overwrought emotion of a grieving mother, but the particular calm of someone who has just confirmed something they already believed. She sat down across from me, the same posture, left thumb over right, and she said, "I heard him." I said, "What did he say?" She said, "He said, 'Mama, I'm still here. You already know what the priests need to hear. Tell them about the hospital in Umbria. Tell them the date.'" She had not been told about the letter. She had not been told about the 3rd of March. She had not been told about Perugia. No one had shared that file with her. She said, "What hospital in Umbria? I don't know anything about a hospital in Umbria." And I said, "I do." I told her everything. I showed her the copy of the letter. The original was in Rome. I showed her Luca Mori's text message. I showed her my hospital admission record from Santa Maria della Misericordia, Perugia, the 2nd of March. She read everything, once, carefully. Then she set the papers down. She did not cry. She said, "He told me before he died that the signs would be precise, not almost right, exactly right. He said, the one thing that will convince the person it's meant for is the exactness. Anyone can feel something warm. Only a specific date is a miracle." I had not told her about the warmth. I had not mentioned it in any document she could have accessed. She said, "He also said," and I want to say this carefully, "he said that the warmth would be the part that couldn't be explained away. Not the date, because dates can feel like retrospective coincidence if you're determined enough. The warmth. He said, the warmth is the sign that proves the date was real and not invented later." I sat with that for a long time, because she was right. A date in a sealed letter is compelling, but a date in a sealed letter plus an independent physiological anomaly, experienced in the same room at the same hour, measured against a baseline temperature, reported to an independent witness at the time of occurrence, that is a different category of evidence. I asked her, "Did he say anything else today? Anything that connected to what you'd heard before?" She said, "He said, the man who reads this in 2025, the man watching, tell him that the Eucharist was never just the start for me. It was the whole road." I did not know what to make of that at the time. In September of 2025, after the canonization, I understood it differently. But I'm not there yet. Beatification. The 10th of October, 2020. St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis, surrounded by the particular stripped-down silence of a ceremony held during a pandemic year. No crowds in the numbers that would normally fill that space. Socially distanced rows of attendees. The vast, pale paving stones nearly empty compared to what they would have held in normal times. I watched on a screen in my apartment in Assisi because I was among those who could not travel. At 11:43 in the morning, Pope Francis elevated Carlo Acutis to the status of blessed. In his homily, he said, "Blessed Carlo reminds us that true happiness is found in putting God first and loving others as God loves them. To be always with the Lord." This was his motto. 11:43. The warmth came at 11:43 and lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I timed it. Room temperature was 17 degrees Celsius, confirmed on the thermostat. Confirmed a second time on a separate indoor unit I had placed precisely because I had wanted a second instrument. Both read 17 degrees. I wrote it down immediately after. Then I called Father Hermano. He said, "I know. Something happened here too." He was in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, standing near Carlo's tomb, at the moment of beatification. He said the air around the tomb changed temperature briefly. He described it as stepping from shade into sun, which is imprecise but was the language that came to him. He estimated the duration at 3 to 4 minutes. He had been alone in that section of the basilica. 2 separate locations, same duration, same timing. One in an apartment in Assisi, one at the tomb in the basilica. I submitted this account to the dicastery on the 29th of October, 2020. It entered the record as supplementary testimony. I want to tell you about the second miracle and what it confirmed, because it is the final layer of evidence before I come to what I believe the whole accumulation means. The second miracle for canonization involved a woman named Valeria Valverde from Costa Rica. In 2022, Valeria suffered a severe closed head trauma from a fall. The injury was classified as a diffuse axonal injury, a category of brain trauma that, at the severity level documented in her case, carries a median recovery prognosis of poor to nil for full neurological restoration. She was 31 years old. She was comatose for 9 days. On the 5th day, her family began a novena to Carlo Acutis. On the 9th day of the novena, the 9th day of her coma, she woke. Her neurological recovery over the following 3 months was complete. The follow-up MRI at 12 weeks showed no residual axonal damage, consistent with the initial injury classification. Her neurologist submitted a report to the Vatican through the Diocese of San Jose. The Vatican Medical Board reviewed the Valverde case in 2023. The board consists of 5 physicians, 2 neurologists, and 3 specialists in the relevant area of injury. Their collective verdict, submitted on the 14th of November 2023, was, "The neurological recovery documented in this case is inexplicable according to current scientific and medical knowledge." The canonization was announced, 7th of September 2025, Pope Leo XIV, during the Jubilee Year of Hope. I was present for the canonization, not behind a screen this time, present, in Rome, in St. Peter's Square, in a capacity that I would have called impossible to imagine in 2007, when I first opened that box from Milan. During the Mass of canonization, at the moment of the formal declaration, I felt the warmth for the 4th time. 7 minutes, the longest duration I had recorded. I had brought a small thermometer. I am, after all, still a man who measures things. Ambient air temperature in the square, 22 degrees Celsius. My hands, I could not measure them without equipment I did not have, but I noted they were visibly flushed. The priest beside me asked if I was all right. I said yes. He looked at my hands and then looked away. 7 minutes. 12 October 2006 to September 7th, 2025. A boy of 15 to a saint in the Universal Church. Where I am now. Since March of 2016, I have given testimony before the Vatican's dicastery for the causes of saints on 4 separate occasions. I have been invited to speak at universities in Rome, Milan, Dublin, and Manila about the methodology of canonical investigation and what distinguishes documented anomaly from emotionally generated report. I attended the beatification by video and the canonization in person. I have maintained contact with Antonia Salzano, who has given her life to extending her son's legacy in ways that would have been recognizable to him: precise, methodical, Eucharistically centered. I have thought often about what Carlo said to Luca Mori in October of 2006. The difference between a coincidence and a miracle is precision. A coincidence doesn't know your name. A miracle does. I was 63 years old on the 7th of September, 2025. I have been a priest for 31 years. I have reviewed 12,438 pages of documentation about one person. I have received a letter written to me specifically by someone who died 3 days after writing it, specifying a date that matched a hospital admission 19 years in the future, in a city he had named, in a region he had described, with a physical phenomenon that had been independently corroborated across 5 separate accounts in 2 countries. And in all 31 years of priesthood, in all of my formation in philosophy and all of my training in skepticism, I have never found a formulation that accounts for all of that except one. I am not going to say the word miracle and expect it to carry the weight. I have seen the word used cheaply too many times to trust the easy version of it. What I will say is this: the evidence, assembled in its full form, at its most documented and least romantically inflated, points to something outside the ordinary causal order, something that knew details before they existed, something that named the room before the room was relevant, named the date before the date arrived, named the warmth before the warmth was felt. Carlo Acutis, God's influencer, the first millennial saint, patron of the internet, a boy who cataloged 163 verified Eucharistic miracles before he was old enough to drive a car, had understood something that took me 19 years to reach. The Eucharist was not the beginning of his highway. It was the whole road. And the traces, the specific, dated, named, measured, cross-confirmed, legally deposed, Vatican-recorded traces, are not in some private mystical experience that dissolves under examination. They are in a filing cabinet in Assisi, in a deposition in Rome, in a dated phone record from 2006, in a letter written by a 15-year-old boy with a left-leaning hand and a sticker of the Eucharist on his notebook. There was a moment during the canonization Mass on the 7th of September when I looked around St. Peter's Square at the thousands of faces, and I thought about what Carlo had said to his mother on the 9th of October 2006. Tell him not to be afraid. I was not afraid. I haven't been afraid since the morning of the 3rd of March in a hospital room in Perugia, when I felt warmth spread across my chest like sunlight through glass, and a letter written 19 years earlier told me exactly what it was. He knew my name. He knew my date. He knew my room. He was 15 years old, and he was dying, and he was still doing what he had always done, documenting the evidence, making sure the precision was there, making sure that when the moment came, it could not be dismissed as almost right. It was exactly right. It is exactly right. That is the whole testimony. 31 years, 12,000 pages, one envelope, one date, one name. Carlo Acutis, born the 3rd of May 1991 in London, died the 12th of October 2006 in Monza, canonized the 7th of September 2025 in Rome, and still, I believe, present in every room where someone is frightened and needs to be told, do not be afraid. If this testimony has marked you the way it marked my life, I want to ask you one thing. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. On Traces of Heaven, we keep gathering the signs Carlo left all over the world, documented, specific, exact, the kind that know your name. And if you want to carry something of this story with you, the free novena to Carlo Acutis is in the description, the first link right below this video. Pray it over 9 days, for yourself, for someone in a hospital, for someone frightened and alone. Share it with someone who needs it. Keep his memory alive in the most concrete way you can. Carlo said the Eucharist was his highway to heaven. The traces of heaven are everywhere. You only have to know how to look.